from the Gaelic League.
Thank you. I would like to call Commissioner Tim Killeen to the front. As you know, it is March and St. Patrick's Day is on the 17th. We will have our board meeting after the 17th, so we want to celebrate that on today. So we now have a presentation from Commissioner Killeen and Kathleen O'Neill.
Try not to take your agenda this time. Yeah. Murphy goes into the confessional box after years of being away from the church. He pulls aside the curtain and hits the kneeler. There's a fully equipped bar with crystal glasses, the best vestry wine, Guinness on tap, cigars, and liqueur chocolates nearby. On the wall is a fine photographic display of various women who have appeared to have misplaced their garments. He hears the priest come in. Father, forgive me, I think it's been a while since I've been in confession, and I must say the confessional box is much better than it used to be. Father replies, get out, you idiot, you're on my side. Paid Mila Falcha 100,000 welcomes. As the chair mentioned, thank you, Madam Chair, for a little time on the agenda for this. As St. Patrick's Day is rushing up on us, and we have with us Kathleen O'Neill from the Gaelic League, the Irish American Club down on Michigan Avenue there, right 14th. And it's a special year for the Gaelic League, so I invited her over to talk about the Gaelic League, a little bit about the history of the Irish in Detroit and Wayne County. And I would bet, Ms. O'Neill, that somewhere in the Kathleen O'Neill is also an Ann or a Mary somewhere in there. I would just bet on that. But so please welcome Kathleen O'Neill from the Gaelic League.
Thank you. Yes, there are Kathleens and Anns and Marys and Patricks and all that. But I thank you for inviting us here. It is an exciting year, the Gaelic League. How many of you are aware of the Gaelic League on Michigan Avenue? There's many a party there with the county and city employees. It has been at that location for the last 70 years. Started in 1920 at 6th and Abbott. 50 Irish-born men gathered. There was lots happening in Ireland at the time, fighting for their independence, freedom from England, and they met. There was the Gaelic League in Ireland that was formed in 1893, wanting to preserve the Irish culture and particularly the language, because if you do not have a language, you do not have an identity. And so Douglas Hyde and others formed it. They traveled to all parts of the world where the Irish had settled, and different groups formed, and we are one of the ones that has lasted for now 100 years. Moved to 12th and Grand River above the Troy Laundry, which they thought was going to be a 3-year lease, went to 6 years. All of a sudden there was the Depression, and they lasted there for 30 years before they could regather enough funds to purchase a building. And ironically, the building that they purchased, which we are located at now, was purchased from the Ford Motor Company. And here, 70 years later, they're coming back into the neighborhood at the train station. So it's like full circle. There's a couple of things on the board. One is it's just the size of Ireland. It's about the size of Rhode Island. So it's not a very large country, but it has had a lot of immigrants come to the United States and also to Michigan. On the other side, there's a couple things. The logo of the Gaelic League, which is similar to the one in Ireland, with the 4 provinces in a directional north, east, south, and west shape. And then in the middle, it says, it has Chirinchanga, which is land of languages. It was one of the first countries that recorded their history. They have been writers, and the bards and the poets were very, very concerned and wanted to be able to write the history of Ireland accurately. So that's part of it. There is also a book there. That is a book that was written for the Detroit's 300th anniversary. Every group was wondering what they could do. And at the Gaelic League, we decided we were going to open an Irish archives at the Burton Historical Museum, or I mean, not museum, a collection at the Detroit Main Library. And as things were coming in, it was like, oh my goodness, not everyone's getting down to the library. Not everyone is going to know about this event or this picture. So it's a kind of a pictorial history of the first 80 years of the Gaelic League. And some of the fascinating things, one of them that I was very impressed because the picture happened to have one of my cousins who's deceased, but Michael Flatley, who we're all familiar with river dance, his grandmother taught Irish dance at the Gaelic League. And his mother was in the class with my cousin, and then they eventually moved on to Chicago. But I want to talk a little bit, as mentioned, of the effect that the Irish have had in Detroit. And one of the things, there's a couple books, there's a lot of books about Detroit Irish. This is Modern Journeys, though. I don't know if the first or second edition, but it's from the United Irish Societies, who puts on the annual St. Patrick's Parade. And this is how they describe the Irish and the Irish in Detroit. They're people with the P professions: painters, plasters, and plumbers, policemen and publicans, printers, politicians, and priests. So that gives you, they're the service people. They're the laborers, they're the workers. There's another book that Seamus and Eileen Metris, they're a couple that are professors at the University of Toledo that wrote about the Irish in Michigan. And they divided the wave of the immigrants coming over into 5 different categories. So I'm just going to be real brief, but the first one was the colonial period from 1640 to 1815. These immigrants left Ireland because of commercial restriction on the economic development and religious discrimination. They were suffering from the penal laws, which, if you're familiar with Irish history, they were not allowed to practice the religion, no longer to speak the Irish language. Children couldn't go to school, couldn't own property if you were a Catholic. There were numerous rules, so many of them left at that time. The next section was the pre-starvation era of 1815 to 1845. This is the time where the canal systems were built mainly by Irish, and it was a great route to the Great Lakes and to Detroit, where there were a lot of jobs, a lot of employment opportunities. So there was this steady stream of Irish immigrants that came to Michigan. Most of these were education professionals. One of them was George O'Keefe. He came from County Cork, immigrated in 1860 and settled in Detroit in 1818. He was a lawyer, a judge, and founder chairperson of the St. Patrick's Day festivities. He served as their president of the Friends of Ireland and founder of the St. Patrick's Society in 1829. The next fellow that was during this period actually wasn't in Detroit, but had a big effect on Michigan, and this is Charlie O'Malley. He came from County Mayo in 1836. He started or established an Irish settlement on Mackinac Island. He owned a grocery store in 1840. In 1846, he was elected Mackinac's rep to the Michigan legislature, and in 1843, he had the duty of naming some of the northern counties that were all under the Mackinac County. He named 4 of them after ones in Ireland, and that was Antrim, Clare, Roscommon, and Wexford. A 5th county he named Emmet, after the Irish nationalist and rebel leader, Bold Robert Emmet. Michigan is the only state that has counties named after counties in Ireland, thanks to Charlie O'Malley. Robert Elliott is another one that had a big influence. He was from County Tipperary. He was an architect and builder, came in 1834. because he was discriminated in Ireland. Sadly, he died after 6 years of being in a construction accident, but he was elected associate judge for Wayne County. He established the Elliott Immigration Office, and this business arranged passage and kept records of over thousands of Europeans who immigrated. After his death, fortunately, his son, Richard Elliott, continued the business. The next part was the starvation years. There was the Great Famine in Ireland. From 1845 to 1855, these immigrants that came over were destitute and possibly the most illiterate. A significant one of them came to cities, farming, and mining areas. The largest group of immigrants in Detroit at that time, or that came here because it was an established Catholic city, thanks to the French, and they weren't faced with the hostilities that they found on the East Coast. And that's the sign that you see there, no Irish need apply. That is recent. That was 1915, 105 years ago, in the Boston Globe. There was still discrimination going on. So many of these famine Irish came to Detroit because they didn't have that. There was a Catholic church here with St. Anne's Church. They dug canals, as I mentioned. Then after that, the post-starvation years from 1855 to 1920, they mainly settled in communities, mostly educated. They placed a priority on schooling. 74% of the children in 1850, between the ages of 5 and 16 years old, were attending school. This was new, this was different. This is what the Irish wanted. They wanted their children to have that education that they weren't allowed in Ireland. There were a variety of jobs here. You could be a business owner, a laborer, a drayman hauling coal, wood, and other freight to and from the docks and railroad cars. They helped build the railroad business and then ran them. They mined and homestead. There were, as I mentioned, the judges, the doctors, the architects. More single women came to or immigrated during this time because of the poor conditions and civil unrest in Ireland. They became the maids or the domestics. They worked in the clothing industry. They worked in boarding houses. Detroit's first elected Irish-born mayor was in 1858, Mayor John Patton. He was actually a popular carriage maker that was born in County Down, but came to Albany, New York with his family as a teenager, and then came on to Detroit. Patton was involved in the St. Patrick's Day festivities. He was a long-serving president of the St. Patrick's Benevolent Society. 1899, the Lord Mayor of Dublin came to Detroit. Number of years, the first Prime Minister, Emma de Valera, also visited Detroit. During the Civil War, the 15th Michigan Infantry was also known as the Irish Regiment. And it was estimated over 4,000 Irish born and many more Michigan Irish Americans served in the Union Army. Gotta go?
Kathleen's giving you that.
Oh, give me a timeout.
Yeah.
All right, real quickly, one more thing about this time period. Detroit was known as the nation's stove capital, and it was the Dwyer brothers that were sons of Irish immigrants that founded the Detroit Stove Works Company. I guess I could go on many more, but I have my timekeeper back there, and I haven't even gotten to introduce Kathleen Quinn Partika. Her grandfather, and in this other part, was a big part of the labor movement. Patrick Cornelius Quinn, also known as CPAC Quinn, was the one that led the 1937 sit-down strike at the Dodge Main. So much more to share with you. We have a lot of things going on at the Gaelic League. There's lots of books. I guess we're going to be upstairs later. Love to talk to you, and we thank you for giving you this time. Oh yeah, and Kathleen has made some brown bread and some soda bread that you're welcome to taste a little bit of an Irish treat. So thank you very much for having us. Sorry.
Thank you, Kathleen. No, not at all. Yep,
That's my,
yeah. Oh, he does want photos.
okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
This is the time where, like we just saw, that I'd be presenting you with a proclamation and all of that for the 100th anniversary, but befitting of the culture, we're running a little late on that. But there's a big event in Livonia next week, and we'll have a proclamation for you there.
Well, I was going to say, if you keep in mind, in October, we're opening a 3-month display at the Detroit Historical Museum. October 16th is opening night, but it'll be there through October, November, December. And then December 5th, we're having our gala 100th anniversary ball.
Yeah,
All right, so you can do something then,
very good.
if you run real late.
Kathleen, thank you so much. And as we say, you have the map of Ireland on your face. And I'm going to wrap this up real quick. As Kathleen described, Ireland has always been a peasant nation. I mean, dirt floor peasant, 85% of the population. Kathleen gave you a little hint as to what our friends across the Irish Sea imposed on Ireland for 500 years. And instead of an Irish blessing to wrap things up here, a couple of months ago I ran across, and I forget where I ran across it, but it was a little stanza out of what an old Irish song, and it just spoke to me. And we talk, the Irish talk about feeling the soul of Ireland, and it definitely spoke to me on that. Took me a little research. I found it in the Princeton archives, the entire thing. So, and it's entitled Irishman Shanty. We have the Shanty Irish, and then we have the Lace Curtain Irish. But overwhelmingly, the country was Shanty Irish. Did you ever go into an Irishman's shanty? Oh boy, that's the place where whiskey is plenty. With his pipe in his mouth, there sits Paddy so free, no king in his palace is prouder than he. You have to think 18th century Ireland here for this. There's a 3-legged stool with a table to match, and the door of the shanty is locked with a latch. There's nice feather mattresses, all bustin' with straw. For the want of a bedstead, it lays on the floor. There's a snug little bureau without paint or gilt, made of boards that was left over when the shanty was built. There's a 3-cornered mirror hangs on the wall. The devil of face has been in it at all. He has pigs in the sty and a cow in the stable, and he feeds them on scraps left over from the table. They'd starve if confined, so they roam at their ease and come in the shanty whenever they please. He has 3 rooms in one, kitchen, bedroom, and hall, and his chest is 3 wooden pegs on the wall. 2 suits of old clothes make his wardrobe complete, one to wear in the shanty, the same for the street. He can relish good victuals as you ever ate, but is always contented with potatoes and meat. He prefers them when cold if he can't get them hot, and he makes tea in a bowl when he can't get a pot. There is one who partakes of all his sorrows and joys, attends in the shanty the girls and the boys. The brat thinks he's more of than gold that's refined, but Biddy's the jewel that's the set in his mind. The rich may divide their enjoyments alone with those who have riches as great as their own. But Pat hangs the latch string outside the door and will share his last cent with the needy and the poor. Thank you very much. We'll see you up on 7 after the meeting. We'll have a little Irish soda bread, and we'll have the 2 things that were up here also. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.